Well, I thought I would do another one of these. It's about time. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I didn't really think this through. I just pressed record and here we are. I had thought of some stuff to talk about it, but I don't remember any of it. So I guess we'll just go like totally stream of consciousness. One thing that I've been thinking about is, I think it might confuse some people, the demeanor that I have online on my Twitter and on my YouTube versus in my journal on my website and in this like vlog page that is intentionally hard to find. And like, yes, the Ryan Knight persona is performative, but does that mean it's not me? It's complicated, right? I think that people, especially if they don't know you, you need to focus one aspect of your personality to them so that they can kind of put you in a box. People like to put people in boxes, they like to label people. And I'm a very complex person. I don't fit easily into boxes. So, what I'm trying to do is kind of separate, actual aspects of my personality into these different venues and kind of feed feed it to you slowly so that you can more easily grasp that these are different sides of who I am and not an act, so to speak. There is a performative aspect to it, but that's also part of who I am. Does that make sense? Like this person who wants to do this performative thing. Like, I think the easiest comparison is to Poppy or Grimes, or what I was thinking of when I was doing it was Andy Kaufman. And you kind of got to ask yourself, like, the performative element, it's not separate, it's almost a subcategory. Like, that persona exists in the file folder of me as another folder, and then there are more folders there. So it's a side of me. Like, yes, I am this person who has all sorts of complex thoughts and opinions and interests and life experiences and different things, and I have different moods and I act, different ways around some people and different ways around others, just like anybody else. But I'm also this person who meditates all the time and reads all this philosophy and has had these metaphysical experiences, these out of body meditations, ego death through mushrooms, LSD, other drugs, ego death again 2012, ego death again last year, and who does intentionally try and go through these processes. Like, I don't read philosophy and psychology and theology just for like the intellectual thrill of it. Like, I want to do this stuff. I feel like I want to actually do it. So when I read something about Carl Jung's individuation process, Negro, Albedo, Rubido, Citrinitas, this kind of thing, I'm not reading it like, oh, that's interesting. I'm reading it like, I'm gonna do it. And then I'll like see what kind of practical application it has. Like, the way I got here in the first place was because I was reading about the anima animus process and integrating your shadow and these other kind of Jungian things. And, I started trying to integrate my anima, which had all people around me theorizing all sorts of like random things. Like, is he trans? Is he gay? And I'm like, it's basically trying to get in touch with your feminine side kind of thing. And I'm trying, no, the answer is I'm trying to become more in touch with my whole mind and more in control of who I am, and gain a greater level of self-awareness. That's the answer to that. And trying to grow. And I don't feel like any of that should be off limits to me. Um, Moreover, I want to learn everything. I have this insatiable appetite for just learning things, but I don't like authority, I don't like rules, and I don't like rigidity. I like to just be constantly learning things and absorbing them into my intuition so that I can kind of synthesize new ideas and interesting things to do with that information later. I think that is one of the troubling things about most intellectuals is they talk about the performative nature of Ryan Knight. They have this very performative learning to use that knowledge in order to confirm their status, which I think is bizarre and egoistic and misguided. There's another thing I wanted to talk about, which is in a letter that I sent to somebody, I said, God is fiction. I said this kind of matter-of-factly. But I wanted to elaborate on that. Even though you're not even aware that I sent that letter, I don't want the ether to have this misconception about my views on God. I don't know why that bothers me so much, but it does. There's a couple of things here. One is there is, if you read my book, this is obvious. There is a logical, philosophical, utilitarian thread by which I argue my positions. There is also a metaphysical, experiential thread through which I intuit and know things. So when I'm talking to someone that I think is dismissive of human intuition and spirituality and metaphysical experience, I will focus on the logical, philosophical thread because I think that's enough to get them there. I think talking about the metaphysical aspect could potentially only undercut my argument. However, I believe both things. Now, when I say God is fiction, in the context of what I'm saying, I think that's true. I think that religions personify a God with their own self-interest in mind. I think that, based on what I just said, going to the logical argument there is this very fundamental philosophical proof that if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all good, there would be no evil. So one of those things has to be false. I think they're all partially false, but this personification of God in Christian religion, for instance, as in the Old Testament, this vengeful father figure, in the New Testament as this more forgiving gospel figure. It's like a choose your own adventure. It's like believe the story that you want. And when you look at it, if you look at polytheism, if you look in Hindu and Greek and Nordic religions, they all have similar godlike figures that are equally personifications of what the people at the time deemed to be the most virtuous behaviors they could engage in. If you look at, Christianity, it's derived from Greek insofar as the Western tradition of religion started kind of in Egypt. I mean, it started before that in Mesopotamia. You had the Sumerians, etc. But in Egypt, you had thought Thoth. I've only read it, so I don't know how to pronounce it. And that went to the Socratics, that was Greek, and then so on and so forth. Like, that's all descended from kind of the same cast of characters who get rebranded. It's like, how to put it, man? Like Marvel Comics is Greek polytheism. It's just rebranded. It's structurally very similar. So religions are a man-made thing, and these personifications of the gods are decided by religions. Most of what people are doing is actually personifying either human virtues, which are defined through the systems of the soul, or celestial bodies, which give people feelings. Things like the sun, the moon, the stars, volcanoes, weather, etc. However, do I think God is fiction? Do I think we have a creator? Do I think there is, deism, as it's called? It's complicated. It's complicated. I think that when VR advances to the stage where we can no longer distinguish between our physical reality and a virtual reality, you will have no logical reason not to draw the conclusion that our physical reality is a simulation and always has been. And if you get to that point, then you have to figure who created that simulation. Is that God? Well, are we God, having created these horizontal simulated realities? No, we don't elevate ourselves to that level. So you assume that whoever created us is just an advanced species, more advanced than us, who is already at that point on the timeline where they're able to create a simulated reality and manage it. And then we call those ascendant realities, ascendant and descendant realities. And if you enter an ascendant reality, then you, in essence, have become a god. But have you? Do you have direct access to this simulation? And just because I'm in this reality, does that mean that I control World of Warcraft, right? That I'm not a god to that simulated reality, right? So I think personifying the residents of that reality as gods is misguided. Maybe lowercase g gods, in the same way that like a modern billionaire would appear to be a god to a primitive ape from 20,000 years ago. The timeline for that seems off. Maybe that's not enough years. Maybe 200,000 years, is that enough? However, then you have to ask yourself this question, which is, if there is an ascendant reality, who created that reality? It's a further ascendant reality, and there are theoretically infinite ascendant realities. So the idea is, where does that go? And I think the answer that you draw is when you start looking inward, like what hosts all of this stuff? What allows you to interpret what you see and what you experience, and to have intuition, and to see things for the first time and recognize them and know what they are? And if you think about technology in another avenue, which is like search engines, it's a codex. It has to be referencing this material against something. So what I think is that this whole thing is circular. And I explain this a lot better in the book. Right now I'm just kind of going stream of consciousness. But I think that all of these infinite realities are a simulation to create a codex of allowing people to think through any possible number of possibilities for any subject, to work through any number of hypotheticals. I think that's the purpose of all these realities. And what that means is that all of these realities together form a consciousness itself. So people are asking, what is consciousness? Well, you have all these realities inside of your mind. You have the consciousness. So if you go upward, you're within the consciousness of another being. And so you have this question of God. Well, like, in that sense, God would be the being whose consciousness you are a part of. And then the question of, is God all good, all knowing, all powerful? These personification elements. I think it depends. Like if you're inside of the consciousness of Snooky, no, God, they don't have the introspective spiritual capacity to look within and see what you are doing or even recognize what is inside of them. If you are in the consciousness of the Dalai Lama, perhaps there is a greater control and awareness. Based on my metaphysical experience, I can surmise that I think, this is going to sound like bullshit to your atheists or whatever, but based on my metaphysical experiences, I think that at the very least, the consciousness that we're inside of is better at this than I am. And I do meditations, I do chakra meditations. I don't want to say very experienced with this because there are obviously people much more experienced than I am, but I do this regularly. I do it like 5 to 6 more, possibly more times a week, and I do it for like 3 hours at a time. Anyway, so if you read my book, this I really get into this subject there, and I think it's really interesting. I think my view is accurate. I think that it will be vindicated as technology increases, and that we learn more and more about how consciousness works. Some other random things here. I think that one of the reasons that people can't figure out consciousness is because I think it does not exist in this dimension. That sounds bizarre, but think about it. Think about your phone. Your phone has, the operating system installed on it, but if you have a Chromebook, the operating system is actually streamed onto the device. But let's say you have, your brain, and it has these hardwired, it's the hardware. The software, your consciousness, the operating system, and or the personal data, that could be streamed in from the cloud. And then you ask yourself this question, and this is important. You have to understand the fourth dimension, which is time. If there are all these different timelines, and you are the same person in them, does that mean your consciousness is replicated in each timeline? Or does that mean that your consciousness is like a partitioned hard drive, and it is outside in the fourth dimension or higher in the fifth dimension, and it has these partitions, so where you can't access timeline B from timeline A, but the consciousness is the same consciousness across all of them? The reason that that's important is you have to ask yourself if there are these ascendant realities. So you can, say, upload your consciousness to an AI, get embedded into the reality at a code level, and then manifest a body for yourself on the other side of the reality, and sort of be like a cyborg over there. You don't take your body with you. Your consciousness now exists in fifth and sixth dimension, in ascendant and horizontal realities. So it can't be something be something that is present only here. And if it is in an ascendant reality, does our timelines are all hosted within this reality, right? This reality here hosts all of the timelines. So if you go up, that means it has to be outside of the third dimension. It has to be in the time dimension at the very least. And it has to be in the fifth dimension at the very least, because you can take it to horizontal realities. And it has to be in the sixth dimension, ascendant, because you can take it with you and be the same person. So if that is all true, then it is this partitioned hard drive. And that does mean there should be a way to break down the partitions, which you can do that. Anecdotally, there are these people who think they can remember past lives or things from different timelines. In psychology, they say to change your narrative to advance your story. Like, the truth of it is that your memory is a fiction. It's programming that helps you build an identity and build your ego and all this stuff. But if the timeline theory is true, that there are these divergent timelines, and kind of the butterfly effect is true, if something is slightly different in one timeline, all this other stuff is totally different as well, then it all is valid. It all happened to you. And that means yourself is not the ego that's defined by your memories and your experiences in the current timeline. It's the essence of the thing. And what is the essence of the thing? It's independent of those experiences. So it has to be something that exists across multiple timelines. Like it's an algorithm. It's not an answer. It's like a formula. It's a way your consciousness, your particular consciousness. This relates back to what I was saying about how the universe is creating consciousness. Your particular consciousness is an algorithm. It's a way to interpret and react to things. And maybe in one timeline you become a millionaire, maybe in one timeline you become a villain, maybe in one timeline you become homeless. But it's the essence of you and how it responds to those things and the order it responds to them. That is your consciousness. It's not millionaire and homeless. Those things are in states, but your consciousness is quite different. So do I believe there's a God? It's complicated. I think this whole thing is an infinitely expanding Ouroboros. I think that we both house infinite realities inside of ourselves. The void is within and without. I think it's circular. And I think that, it's infinitely expansive in like 12 different dimensions, but it's circular. When you put it all together, it's a loop. And I think that in a sort of interesting way, we are all God because we all house these realities. But who is our God? That's a question. The answer is, I don't know, but we should hope that it's someone who is spiritually enlightened and who cares to keep a clean house and who is aware and responsible for the life that exists inside of it. Maybe that's just another dimension, though. Maybe that's just another trap, and then there's more after that. Well, this got kind of long. What else do I want to talk about? I usually end up talking about girls at the end of these things, which is pretty funny. Anna Akana is growing on me. I watched some videos of her being a little more vulnerable and personal, and I like that. Today is the anniversary of John Lennon's death. Bill Hicks has this bit where he kind of points out, why is it only the people who are advocating for world peace? Always the people advocating for world peace get murdered. It's twisted. Maybe advocating for world peace is the most dangerous political position you can take. It's a scary thing. I tend to think that they have all these different timelines. I really do think that. And why, as a nihilist, do I care about having a better world? The answer is, on one hand, I kind of don't, because my view is this. In one of the timelines, it's the best timeline. So it's selfishness. It's, I want to live in the best timeline. I want this timeline to be... it's like when people graduate from high school and they want to be like the class that everyone remembered. Like, I think I was class of 2004, It's like, yeah, class of 2004 is going to go down as the all-time best class. Everyone's going to remember the class of 2004, this cohort. Like, that's the way I feel about it. I want this to be the best timeline. I want this to be the timeline where, you know, we do it all. We win the game. And there's so many game overs. There's so many ways that we can get a game over. But in order to do everything, you have to colonize space. You have to achieve world peace, because if you don't, you won't be able to do so many of these other things. You'll run out of resources. You'll have resource death. You won't be able to get to the next level, so to speak. You colonize space. You achieve world peace so you can move on and do these more high level goals. You have radical self-expression, which is healing the traumas that are generationally inherited and which cause all this conflict, which inhibits world peace, and it prevents people from being their true selves. You give people autonomy over their own time and freedom of access to the universe so they can complete the individuation process and become whole beings, finding their purpose and being happy, and then, you know, dying. And if you believe that we have a hive mind, a collective consciousness, as I do, that makes us all stronger when people are, you know, fulfilled and self-aware. And you have advanced virtual reality so that we can control what we experience in our lives. That if we wanted to have, you know, 1984 be the future that we play out, we can do that. You don't do it here, you do it there. And it's indistinguishable from here. You kind of, you know, don't even know that you're in a simulation, but you do it there. If you want to do Mad Max, you do it there. But here, in the best timeline, we keep moving forward. And if you're able to do these things and get to the next level, you can start tackling the further along challenges, like human evolutionary divergence, like transhumanism, like ascending to AI, like CRISPR, like genetically modified apes, like raising human genetics and consciousness to the next level. You know, Neil deGrasse Tyson said on the Russell Brand podcast that if we were 2% smarter, the smartest man on earth would look like a chimpanzee to us. And I think there is truth to that, but I think the human race is afraid of its own evolution at this point. I think that the human race is so otherizing and so committed to being monkeys in a barrel. And what I mean by that is when one monkey tries to escape the barrel, they pull it down because they are jealous or insecure, or they don't want to be left alone, or they just have this savage human frenzy. You can't tackle any of those things. You won't even get to that level unless you do this other stuff: the deep space colonization, the world peace, the radical self-expression, the advanced virtual reality, the autonomy over time. If you want to play this materialistic game of, you know, who can have the biggest gold-plated castle on a dying planet, like, that's great, but it's game over, you know, sooner rather than later. And even if that game were sustainable for the long term, eventually our sun grows and heats our planet to the point where it's uninhabitable. Like, you have to do this stuff at a certain point. Like, you have to. The question is our human species smart enough to get out in front of it and do it now? Because if you do it now, all this stuff, all this cool stuff comes so much sooner. I don't know. I'm going to leave it there. I believe in you guys. I believe that we will get there.